Next, we're going to discuss amount of turn, a very important element in dancing, because if you know how much you're turning and your partner knows how much they're turning, you have a much better chance of staying together. First of all, what is turn? Well, turn is any time you start in one place and end up in another. That's really what turn means. So what we do is we need some measurement in order to determine how much did we turn if we ended up here and started over here. The system we use is fractions, so you have to get familiar with your eighths and quarters, 3/8, 5/8, and things like that. And I'm going to show you exactly how that works and how you can calculate your turns in dancing. First thing I'd like to do is just briefly define turning left versus right, because although to some people that's extremely obvious, to many people that's not as obvious. So what I always tell people is if when you're turning you notice that your left shoulder is moving backwards, that means you're turning to the left. Then of course the opposite is true. If that right shoulder is moving backwards while you're turning, that means you are turning to your right. Okay? Now, let's take a look at the grid once more and talk a little bit about how we measure turns. The smallest fraction we usually talk about is an eighth of a turn. Occasionally a 16th creeps in there, but primarily we talk about eighths, quarters, halves, etc. So, one piece of this pie is an eighth of a turn. Two pieces of this pie, that'd be 1/8. Two pieces of the pie is a quarter. Three pieces, this right here, this angle, kind of like a hockey stick, is 3/8 of a turn. If we go from one position and do a complete about face, that's a half a turn. If we do one more piece of pie from a half, we get to 5/8 of a turn. If we do one more eighth, we're at 3/4 of a turn from our starting position. And now if we add one more eighth, we've made 7/8 of a turn to this point, and now we're back and have made a full turn. So I'd like to give you some very quick calculating tips that might be very helpful to you. Because very often you have to say 3/8 turn to the right, and you have to know what that means. First of all, a good way to start is to just start the facing line of dance and count it out. 1/8, 2/8, 3/8. I go from here to here is 3/8 to my right. If I wanted to go 5/8 to my right, I might think, well, 5/8 is 1/2 plus an eighth. So I'm going to turn to the right, make my half, and go one more eighth. Where it may get a little tricky is when you are starting on a diagonal. So I'm going to show you something that's interesting. Anytime you make, let's say, a quarter of a turn, which would go from here to here, anytime you have a quarter or a half or 3/4, not an eighth, if you start facing square to a wall, you're going to end facing square to a wall. And if you start facing on a diagonal and make a quarter of a turn, you're going to end also facing on a diagonal. That's sometimes very useful to help you make your turns more quickly. Now, just the opposite is true when you're calculating eighths. For example, if I start square to a wall and I dance 3/8 of a turn, if I start square to a wall, I automatically will end up diagonal to a wall. And the opposite is true. If I start on a diagonal and make 3/8 of a turn or 1/8 of a turn, you'll see that I go from a diagonal to square to the room. So that can help you to calculate more quickly. Now I'd like to give you some terms that we use in measuring our turns. And they are commence to turn, body turns less, body completes turn, outside and inside of turns, and the use of the words between, on, and over. Okay, let's start with commence to turn. Whenever we say commence to turn, for example, to the left, what we're really implying is that the body is starting to turn, but not the feet. So if you see that I'm starting facing line of dance here, and I take a step forward on my left foot, you see that my body is winding up starting the turn, but my foot has not actually changed. It's still straight ahead, just as my right foot is. This is the situation we say commence to turn to the left. And in 100% of the situations, you'll notice that there's also contra body movement happening every time you say commence to turn. body turns less has to do with that discussion we had earlier about a pointing alignment. For example, if I step back here, backing center, and point to line of dance, I have actually made 1/4 turn to the left. But since my body is in between, we say the body has turned less. As I bring my right foot in, my body completes the turn. So the occasion this occurs is almost 100% of the time as a result of being on the inside of a turn, which means the person who has the smaller amount or the person who steps backwards. I step back, and then I automatically, as I step side, end up with my body turning less. Body completes turn again is just when we close the feet and we're back lined up. We just mentioned inside of turn. Outside of turn is when the person is stepping forward, either leader or follower. They're the person who has more to swing around, right? Has further distance to go. We call that being on the outside of turn. And just to show you how we measure that, because it's a little bit different feeling than from what we're doing, if I'm facing wall and step forward, I would say commence to turn to the left if I'm using contra body movement, which I am. And now, if I took this much turn, I would say 1/4 turn left between 1 and 2. I don't need to say body turns less, because as I stepped forward, I was able to turn through the toe of my left foot, which enabled my body to keep square with my feet, and I didn't have to say body turns less. So on the outside of turns, we don't use body turns less, only when we step backward and have a pointing alignment, also meaning a body turns less. I'd like to briefly discuss the terms between, on, and over. This is the bane of studying for many people, just trying to understand this. And truth is, there's really not a wrong way to say it, because we're just trying to use a correct language, and yet we're trying to be consistent. So this is my personal philosophy and what I believe we're going to put into the DVIDA manuals on a more consistent basis. Really, we always measure turns between one foot or another. For example, if I step here and then suddenly I'm here, we've measured 1/4 of the fact that I stepped one direction and now we're another. So between the 2 feet is how we measure it. So really, that happens all the time. We're always measuring between one step and another. So I think we should say that. The times we say on a step is actually on a pivot. On a pivot, we would step forward, for example, on the right foot. We're in this direction. And a pivot, which is a turn on the ball of the foot without changing weight, turns like so, and we've still on that one foot. So we don't need to say between. There isn't any between to say. It all happened on one foot. So through our examples, and you'll see some later, I think it will help you a lot to understand how we use these terms. We use the term over when we're talking about turn for using more than 2 steps. For example, if in the cha-cha, I would say from here, 3/8 of a turn over this step, and this step, over those 3 steps. So that's a common place, for example, in cha-cha on triples. Anytime that you have more than 2 steps, we'll describe the turn is over those steps. Okay, we're coming to the part about how to state for the exam, how to state alignments for the exam. And I'm going to give you an example in the combination turn. I'm going to start facing diagonal center and give you the amount of turn for this figure. Commence to turn left on 1. 1/4 turn left between 1 and 2. 1/8 turn left between 2 and 3. Commence to turn left on 4. 3/8 turn left between 4 and 5. Body turns less. Body completes turn on 6. No turn on 7, 8, or 9. Commence to turn right on 10. 1/4 turn right over 10, between 10 and 11, 1/8 of a turn left between 11 and 12. I'm going to move up here just a bit. Commence to turn right on 13. 3/8 turn right between 13 and 14, body turns less, body completes turn on 15. And no turn on 16, 17, or 18. Just like to mention that you don't have to say the numbers at the beginning of each of those steps because it's built into the explanation. It would be redundant to say 1 commenced to turn left on 1. So we simply say 1. We simply say commence to turn left on 1. It's also very important to say which direction you're going. So you don't want to say commence to turn. You want to say commence to turn left or commence to turn right. And now we're going to have Allison and Eldon give you some more examples of how to state amount of turn for your exam.
In the Viennese Waltz, I will give the amount of turn for the right turn as leader. 1/8 turn right between previous step and 1. 1/4 turn right between 1 and 2. 1/8 turn right between 2 and 3. 1/8 turn right between 3 and 4. 3/8 turn right between 4 and 5. Body turns less. Body completes turn on 6.
In the tango, I will give the amount of turn in the promenade pivots as follower. No turn on 1. 1/8 turn right between 1 and 2. 1/2 turn right on 3. 1/2 turn right on 4. 1/2 turn right on 5. 1/4 turn right on 6. No turn on 7. 3/8 turn left on 8. No turn on 9, 10, or 11. For another example, in the cha-cha, I am going to demonstrate the amount of turn in the crossover breaks as leader. No turn on 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. 1/8 turn right on 6. 1/8 turn right on 7. No turn on 8. 3/8 turn left over 9, 10, and 11. 1/8 turn left on 12. No turn on 13. 3/8 turn right over 14, 15, and 16. 1/8 turn right on 17. No turn on 18. 3/8 turn left over 19, 20, and 21. 1/8 turn left on 22. 1/2 turn left on 23. 1/4 turn left on 24. No turn on 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, or 30.